The Missouri sun felt like a judgment. It beat down on Tabitha Zimmer's face, already raw from crying. She sat on her trunk by the river, a bride with no groom, her wedding dress a mess of mud and river water. The life she was promised had vanished before it even began. He was a ghost, a man made of ink and lies. Harold Jenkins. He'd painted a beautiful picture in his letters, a world of comfort and partnership on the frontier. Then he saw her. Just one look as she stepped off the steamboat. One dismissive glance. He'd muttered something under his breath, something about her being too plain, and then he was gone, melted into the crowd like a coward. He'd left her stranded in the Missouri Territory, 1853, with nothing but a ruined dress and a handful of coins. It wasn't enough to get home. Not that there was a home to get back to. The farm was gone, lost to debt after the fever took her parents. Her younger siblings were scattered, charity cases living with distant relatives. She was supposed to be their anchor, their hope. Now she was just debris, washed up on the muddy bank of the Missouri River. "Miss," the voice came from above. She looked up, squinting. A tall man stood over her, his face hidden in the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat. A cowboy. His presence felt large, imposing. "You've been sitting there for 3 hours." "I'm waiting for someone," she lied, her voice a brittle whisper. He spat on the ground, a slow, deliberate motion. "No, you ain't. Jenkins ain't coming back." The name hit her like a physical blow, a cold dread, colder than the damp dress clinging to her skin, seeped into her bones. How could this stranger know that name? "You know Mr. Jenkins?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Know of him," the cowboy corrected. His tone was rough, like gravel. "No, this is the 4th time he's done this. Orders a woman up the river, takes one look, and cuts 'em loose. Man's a snake, gets his kicks from feeling important." Fresh tears burned in her eyes. She turned away, mortified. She wouldn't let him see her break again. She had to be stronger than this. But the humiliation was a tide pulling her under. He crouched down, bringing his face out of the shadows. His eyes were a startling, piercing blue in a sun-weathered face. "Name's Flint Yancey. I run cattle north of here." "Tabitha Zimmer," she replied, the proper Boston manners a strange echo from a life that no longer existed. He gave a single, sharp nod. Then he stood, grabbing the handle of her trunk and lifting it like it was filled with feathers. His strength was effortless, almost shocking. He looked down at her, his blue eyes unblinking. "You're mine now." The words hung in the air, terrifying and absolute. Tabitha scrambled to her feet, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I beg your pardon." Was this it? Was this how her life ended? From one monster to another? A flicker of something, amusement, crossed his face. "Not like that, Miss Zimmer. I mean you need a place to go. I need a housekeeper. My last one ran off and married one of my hands." She stared at him, suspicion warring with desperation. He was offering a lifeline, but it felt like a leash. "And why should I trust you, Mr. Yancey? I've been deceived once today. I don't intend to make it a habit." He set the trunk down with a soft thud. He faced her squarely, his gaze direct and unflinching. "Because I ain't promising you a life of ease. I'm offering honest work for honest pay. $3 a week, plus room and board. You give me a month. If you don't like it, I'll pay your passage back to whatever rock you crawled out from under back east." The offer was blunt, insulting even, but it was also real. A job, a roof, a chance to survive. Her options were a stark, empty landscape. This, or starve. "I can cook," she said, lifting her chin, "and I'm proficient with the needle." "That'll do," he grunted, hoisting her trunk again. "Wagons up the hill." She followed him, the mud sucking at her boots. Her beautiful wedding dress, her one fine thing, was ruined beyond repair. It was a fitting shroud for the death of her dreams. The wagon was simple, pulled by two strong horses that watched them with placid eyes. Flint tossed her trunk in the back without a grunt. "You got other clothes in there?" he asked, his eyes lingering on her muddy dress with disapproval. "Yes." "Good. Town's got a hotel. Change there before we head out. It's a long ride." "I don't have money for a room," she admitted, the words tasting like ash. Flint let out a heavy sigh, a sound of pure annoyance. He dug into his pocket and pressed a coin into her hand. "Room's at the end of the hall. Tell Mrs. Hobbs I sent you. I'll wait." An hour later she emerged a different woman. The wedding dress was bundled in a cloth sack, a painful memory tucked away. She wore a simple brown wool dress, practical and plain. Her hair was pinned up tight, her face washed clean of tears and dirt. She would not be a victim. She would be a survivor. Flint gave a curt nod of approval. He helped her onto the wagon seat, his hands strong and calloused at her waist. The brief touch sent a strange jolt through her. "It's a fair piece to my land," he warned as he snapped the reins. "We'll stop for the night at Fort Wilson." As the wagon rumbled away from the river town, Tabitha took one last look back at the steamboat dock, the place where her future had been murdered. Then she turned her eyes forward to the endless dusty horizon, toward a man she didn't know and a life she couldn't imagine. She was no longer a bride. She was something else entirely, something tougher, and she was terrified. The first hour was silent. The only sounds were the groaning of the wagon wheels and the rhythmic clopping of the horses' hooves. Tabitha stole glances at the man beside her. Flint Yancey. He was younger than she'd first thought, maybe 25. His profile was hard, carved from stone, with the jawline darkened by a day's worth of stubble. His hands holding the reins were powerful, the knuckles scarred, but his nails were clean. An odd detail that stuck with her. "You got family back east?" he asked suddenly, his voice startling her out of her thoughts. "No, not anymore," she said, her voice flat. "My parents died. The farm was sold." He nodded, his eyes fixed on the trail ahead. "That why you answered Jenkins' advertisement?" "I have younger siblings," she explained, staring at her own gloved hands. "They were taken in by an aunt. I thought, if I married well, I could send for them, bring them west." She let out a short, bitter laugh. "Foolish." "Not foolish," Flint said, his voice surprisingly quiet. "Brave." They fell back into silence. The sun began to dip low, setting the prairie on fire with shades of gold and orange. It was a wild, savage beauty, so different from the gentle green hills of Massachusetts. It felt like another world, and in a way, it was. Fort Wilson was less a fort and more a collection of rough buildings huddled together for safety. A trading post, a few houses, and a lodge that smelled of stale beer and unwashed men. Flint paid for 2 rooms and a hot meal without haggling. The stew was greasy but filling, and the coffee was strong enough to stand a spoon in. She ate until she was full, a basic animal comfort she hadn't realized she craved. "You need anything else?" he asked when she'd wiped her plate clean with a piece of cornbread. She shook her head. "No, thank you, Mr. Yancey. You've been kind." A strange expression flickered in his eyes, there and gone in an instant. "First light, Miss Zimmer. Sleep well." In her small, bare room, the full weight of the day finally crashed down on her. She had traveled 1,000 miles to marry a man who found her repulsive. Now she was the employee of a stranger, heading to a ranch in the middle of nowhere. It was a nightmare. But then she thought of the alternative. Alone, penniless, at the mercy of anyone who happened by. Flint Yancey might be gruff and unnerving, but he seemed honorable. He had offered her a job, not charity. He'd given her a room of her own. Still, She reached into her boot and pulled out the small, sharp knife her father had given her. For protection, he'd said. She had thought he was being overly cautious. Now she understood. She slid the knife under her thin pillow. She wasn't helpless. She wouldn't be a victim again. The next day, the silence in the wagon felt different. Less awkward, more comfortable. She started asking questions, and to her surprise, Flint answered them. He told her about the ranch, 800 head of cattle, a dozen hands, a house his father built before consumption took him. His mother followed 2 years later. "You've been alone since then?" she asked. "Had my brother Nate," he said, a shadow passing over his face. "He got gold fever in '49, headed for California. Haven't seen him since." The way he said it suggested a wound that had never properly healed. No wife? Children? The question was too personal, and she regretted it instantly. No. The word was a slammed door. Then, softer, he added, "The house has 4 bedrooms. You'll have your own space. Don't you worry." Late that afternoon, he pulled the horses to a stop at the crest of a hill. "There it is," he said, a note of something like pride in his voice. "Yancey Ranch." Below them a green valley unfolded. A creek cut through it like a silver ribbon. A large log house stood near the bank, surrounded by barns and corrals. In the distance, cattle moved like specks of black pepper across the hills. It was rugged and isolated, but it was also beautiful. It felt solid, real. "It's lovely," she said, and she meant it. The barest hint of a smile touched his lips. Home. As they drew closer, an older man with a shock of gray hair came out of a barn to meet them. "That's Theo Brown," Flint said. "My foreman. Been here since my pa's day." Theo's face was a road map of wrinkles. He broke into a wide grin when he saw them. "About time you got back, boss. That new bull is giving us fits." He tipped his hat to Tabitha. "Ma'am." "Theo, this is Miss Zimmer," Flint said, jumping down and turning to help her. His hands were firm at her waist again, lifting her down as if she weighed nothing. "She's the new housekeeper." Theo's smile widened. "Thank the Lord. The boss's biscuits nearly killed a man last week." "They weren't that bad," Flint grumbled, but his cheeks were flushed. Tabitha found herself smiling. The easy banter between the two men was reassuring. This felt like a place of history, of loyalty. "I'll get Miss Zimmer settled," Flint said, grabbing her trunk. "Then I'll deal with that bull." The inside of the house was a shock. It was spacious, clean, with a massive stone fireplace and shelves overflowing with books. Shakespeare, Plutarch, poetry. Not what she expected from a cattle rancher. "Kitchen's through there," Flint said, gesturing. "Bedrooms are down the hall." He led her to a room at the end of the hall. It had a simple wooden bed, a writing desk, and a window that looked out over the creek. A colorful handmade quilt was folded at the foot of the bed. It was clean. Too clean. "This was my mother's sewing room," Flint explained, setting down her trunk. "Figured you'd prefer it to the bunk where the last housekeeper stayed." "It's perfect," she said, genuinely touched. He lingered at the door. "Supper's at 6. But you don't have to cook tonight. You're tired from the road." "Nonsense," she said, her confidence returning. "It's my job. Besides, after hearing about your biscuits, I consider it my civic duty." For the first time, Flint Yancey laughed. It was a deep, rich sound that completely changed his face, erasing the hard lines and revealing the younger man beneath. "Fair enough, Miss Zimmer. I'll warn the men to be brave." After he left, she sat on the bed. The room was nice, the ranch was prosperous, and Flint Yancey was full of surprises. This wasn't the life she'd planned, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't dared to feel. Hope. But as she ran her hand over the perfectly folded quilt, a cold thought intruded. This room, his mother's room, felt preserved, as if it had been waiting. The last housekeeper, Mrs. Collins, had stayed in a bunk. Why was she being treated differently? Why was she given the room of the sainted mother? The kindness felt less like generosity and more like a plan she was not yet a part of. And that was a terrifying thought. The kitchen was a disaster, a clear sign of men left to their own devices. But it was well stocked. Tabitha rolled up her sleeves and got to work, imposing order on the chaos. By 6 o'clock, the aroma of simmering beans and baking cornbread filled the house. The ranch hands, a dozen of them, filed in, removing their hats and nodding shyly as Flint introduced them. They ate like starving wolves, their praise for her cooking effusive and genuine. "Miss Zimmer, this food is a gift from heaven," a young cowboy named Burke declared. "We've been living on the boss's jerky and bad temper," added Theo, the foreman, with a wink. Flint just grunted, but he ate 2 helpings of everything. For the first time since leaving Boston, Tabitha felt a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging. The days settled into a rhythm. Early morning breakfasts, long days of cleaning and organizing, evenings spent mending clothes by the fire. She transformed the neglected house into a home. She scrubbed floors, aired out dusty rooms, and even found a secret stash of her own, a small collection of novels hidden behind a loose brick in the fireplace, clearly belonging to Flint's mother. It felt like finding a kindred spirit across the years. Flint was a phantom during the day, always out on the range. But at night he would linger after the other men left, sipping coffee while she worked. Their conversations were quiet at first, careful explorations. She told him of her dream to be a teacher. He told her about the brutal winters and the constant fight to keep the ranch alive. He was a man of few words, but the things he didn't say seemed to hang in the air between them. He watched her constantly. It wasn't a leering gaze, but something more intense. An appraisal, as if he were measuring her for something. One morning she found a locked door at the end of the main hall. It was the only room she hadn't been in. "What's in here?" she asked Flint that night. He stiffened. "My father's office. I keep it locked." "Why?" "Private papers," he said, his voice flat, shutting down the conversation. But his eyes held a flicker of something else. Not just privacy. Fear. Another week passed. One afternoon, Tabitha was airing out linens when she heard a commotion from the corrals. Flint was there with a new horse, a stunning palomino that fought against the rope with wild, terrified eyes. "Found her running with a wild herd," Flint told her when she drew near, his voice a low murmur meant to soothe the animal. "But she's been saddled before. Someone hurt this one, badly." There was a deep empathy in his voice as he spoke to the horse, a gentleness she hadn't seen before. He spent hours with the animal, not breaking it, but earning its trust. He named her Goldie. "Come here," he said to Tabitha one day. "Let her get your scent." Hesitantly she approached. The horse's eyes were wide with panic, but as Tabitha spoke softly, it seemed to calm. It nudged her hand with its soft nose. "She likes you," Flint said, a rare smile touching his lips. "Animals know. They can smell kindness or deceit." The last words were pointed, his blue eyes boring into hers. It felt like another test, a test she didn't understand. He began teaching her to ride. Not on the wild palomino, but on an old, gentle mare named Daisy. The lessons became the center of her day. Under the vast Missouri sky, with Flint's hands guiding her, she felt a sense of freedom she'd never known. He was a good teacher, patient and firm. The physical closeness was unnerving and thrilling. One evening they rode to the top of a hill overlooking the valley. The world was bathed in the soft light of dusk. "It's been more of a home these past few weeks than it has in years," Flint said, not looking at the view, but at her. "You've brought light back to this place." His intensity was a palpable force. It stole the air from her lungs. She had come here as a servant, a stray he'd taken in. But the way he looked at her now was not the way a master looks at a housekeeper. Just as he leaned closer, a low rumble of thunder echoed in the distance. Dark clouds were boiling on the horizon. "Storm's coming in fast," he said, his tone shifting back to business. "We need to head back." They raced the storm, but it was faster. The sky opened up, unleashing a torrent of cold, driving rain. They were soaked in seconds. "There's a line shack over that rise," Flint shouted over the wind. "We can wait it out there." The shack was tiny, just one room, but it was dry. Flint had a fire roaring in the small stove in minutes. Tabitha stood shivering, her dress plastered to her body. "Get out of those wet clothes," he ordered, his back to her as he pulled a rough wool blanket from a shelf. "You'll catch your death." Her fingers were numb as she fumbled with the buttons of her dress. She stripped down to her chemise, her body trembling from cold, and something else entirely. She wrapped the thick blanket around herself. "You can turn around," she said, her voice shaky. He turned. His own shirt was soaked, clinging to a body that was hard and lean with muscle. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. The tiny shack felt charged, the air thick with unspoken things. The storm outside was a pale imitation of the one brewing between them. "Tabitha," he began, his voice low and raspy. He took a step closer. "I didn't just happen upon you at that river bank." A cold knot formed in her stomach. "What do you mean?" "I was there because I knew you were coming. I knew Jenkins would be there to meet you." Her mind reeled. It didn't make sense. "How? How could you possibly know that?" He ran a hand through his damp hair, his face etched with a conflict she couldn't decipher. "Because I've been hunting him. For a very long time." The floor seemed to drop out from under her. This wasn't a rescue. It was an ambush, and she had been the bait. Hunting him? Why? "He's not just some cad who leaves women at the altar, Tabitha. He's a swindler. A thief. He finds desperate women through those matrimonial papers, promises them the world, and convinces them to bring their savings, their family heirlooms, whatever they have. He meets them, takes their money, and vanishes." The story was ugly, but it still didn't explain Flint's involvement. "What does that have to do with you?" Flint's jaw clenched, a muscle twitching in his cheek. He wouldn't meet her eyes. He stared into the fire as if the answers were written in the flames. "5 years ago, I had a sister. Her name was Clara. She was younger than me, full of life. She wanted to see the world beyond this valley. She answered an ad. A man in St. Louis. A merchant," he said. "He wrote her beautiful letters." He paused, and the silence was heavy with grief. "I told her it was a mistake. Our father had just died, the ranch was struggling. I needed her here. We argued. She called me selfish, said I just wanted a housekeeper I didn't have to pay." The memory was clearly a knife in his gut. "She left. She took our mother's jewelry, the last of our family's real money, and she went to meet him." He finally looked at her, and the pain in his eyes was so raw it made her ache. "His name wasn't Harold Jenkins then. He uses many names. We got a letter a month later. Not from her, from a sheriff. They found her body in a cheap hotel room. She'd taken poison. He had taken everything from her and disappeared. The shame was too much for her to bear." Tabitha felt sick. The blanket suddenly felt suffocating. She was a ghost in someone else's story. "So you've been tracking him?" "Ever since. I've learned his methods. I follow the matrimonial papers. I find out who he's writing to. I couldn't save the others. I was always a step behind. But this time I was ahead of him. I knew he was meeting you." The pieces clicked into place, each one colder and sharper than the last. His kindness wasn't kindness. It was calculation. He hadn't rescued her. He'd acquired her. She was a tool, a means to an end. "And me?" she whispered, the words catching in her throat. "What was I to you? Just a pawn in your game of revenge?" "At first," he admitted, his voice ragged with shame. "At first, yes. I needed to get close to him, and you were the way. I was going to use you to draw him out. But then I saw you, sitting there by the river, your whole world shattered, and you weren't broken. You were furious. You were a survivor. You were just like—" He trailed off. "Like your mother?" she finished for him, the words dripping with sarcasm. "Like your sister. Like no one I'd ever met," he said, taking another step closer. "Watching you these past weeks, Tabitha, it stopped being about revenge. It started being about you." He reached out, his hand hovering in the air between them. "What I feel for you, that's real. None of that was a lie." But how could she believe him? Her entire reality on this ranch was a carefully constructed fiction designed to trap another man. The well-kept room, the riding lessons, the shared moments. Were they all just part of the performance? The rain hammered against the roof, a relentless rhythm counting down to a future she couldn't see. He had saved her from one predator only to drag her into his own dark obsession. She looked at the man before her, a stranger cloaked in lies and grief. He was offering her his heart, but it felt like just another cage. And the worst part, the most terrifying part of it all, she was starting to believe she wanted to be in it. The storm outside raged on, but inside the small shack, a fragile truce settled. Tabitha kept the blanket wrapped tightly around her, a flimsy shield against the torrent of his confessions. She didn't trust him. She couldn't. But she also couldn't deny the flicker of truth she saw in his tormented eyes. He wasn't a simple villain. He was a man hollowed out by grief, and his obsession with Jenkins was the only thing that had filled the void. They rode back to the ranch at dawn, the world washed clean by the rain. The air between them was thick with unspoken questions. The other hands noticed the change immediately. The easy camaraderie between the boss and the housekeeper was gone, replaced by a tense, watchful silence. Theo, the old foreman, looked from Flint to Tabitha, his weathered face creased with concern, but he was wise enough not to ask. Tabitha threw herself into her work, scrubbing and polishing with a frantic energy. She needed the routine, the simple logic of a clean floor and a well-stocked pantry. It was a world that made sense, unlike the tangled web of secrets she now found herself in. She avoided being alone with Flint, making sure there were always other people around, a buffer of bodies to keep his intensity at bay. But he was patient. He gave her space. He watched her from a distance, his expression a mixture of guilt and longing. He left small gifts for her to find, a wildflower on her pillow, a new book on her bedside table, a piece of honeycomb stolen from a wild hive. They were silent apologies, quiet pleas for a forgiveness she didn't know how to give. One evening, a week after the storm, she was in the library, unable to sleep. She ran her fingers over the spines of the books, seeking solace in their silent company. She found a small, leather-bound volume of poetry. Tucked inside was a faded photograph, a daguerreotype of a young woman with Flint's startling blue eyes and a mischievous smile. Clara. His sister looked so full of hope, the same hope Tabitha had carried with her on the steamboat. A wave of empathy, sharp and unwelcome, washed over her. She finally understood the depth of Flint's wound. He wasn't just seeking justice. He was trying to rewrite the past to save the sister he felt he had failed. She heard a floorboard creak behind her. Flint was standing in the doorway, watching her. She was beautiful, Tabitha said softly, holding up the photograph. She was, he agreed, his voice thick with emotion. He walked into the room, stopping a few feet away. "He won't get away with it this time, Tabitha. I swear it." "What is your plan, Flint? You bring me here, you wait, and then what?" "He'll come looking for you," Flint said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. Men like Jenkins are arrogant. They think they're invisible. He won't be able to resist knowing what happened to the plain little thing he left by the river. He'll hear rumors. A new woman at the Yanzi Ranch. He'll get curious. And when he comes sniffing around, I'll be waiting. It was a cold-blooded plan. She was the cheese in the trap. But a strange, dark thought entered her mind. Jenkins had humiliated her, discarded her like trash. The thought of him getting his comeuppance, it wasn't entirely unpleasant. "And what if your plan works?" she asked. "What happens to me then? Once you have your revenge, is my employment here terminated?" "Never," he said, the word a solemn vow. "This is your home now, Tabitha, if you'll have it." He took a step closer, his eyes pleading with her. "I know I lied to you. I know I used you. But my feelings for you are the truest thing I have left. When this is over, I want to build a life with you, an honest one." Before she could answer, the sound of hoofbeats echoed from the yard, fast and urgent. Both of them tensed. Theo's voice shouted from outside. "Boss, rider coming in. Looks like he's been through hell." Flint was out the door in an instant, Tabitha right behind him. One of the ranch hands was helping a man off his horse. The man was covered in dust and grime, his clothes torn. He stumbled forward into the light spilling from the house, and Flint froze. The man looked up, his face gaunt and bearded, but the eyes were a familiar, startling blue. "Nate?" Flint whispered, his voice choked with disbelief. The stranger broke into a weak grin. "Hello, brother. Did you miss me?" It was Nate Yanzi, the long-lost brother, returned from the dead. Nate's return threw the ranch into a state of shock and celebration. The hands who remembered him slapped his back. Theo hugged him fiercely, and Flint was transformed. The grim, haunted man was gone, replaced by a laughing, vibrant brother, overjoyed to have his family back. He gave Nate the best room, ordered the finest meal, and uncorked a bottle of whiskey he'd been saving for years. Tabitha watched from the sidelines, a ghost at the feast. Nate was charming. He had an easy smile and a quick wit, and he regaled them with stories of his adventures in the gold fields of California. He claimed he'd made a small fortune, lost it to a crooked partner, and had spent the last 2 years working his way home. But something about him felt wrong. His eyes, so like Flint's, held a different light. Where Flint's gaze was intense and direct, Nate's was shifty, constantly scanning, assessing. And when he looked at Tabitha, there was a flicker of something, a predatory gleam that made her skin crawl. "So you're the new housekeeper," he said to her during dinner, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "My brother always did have a knack for finding lost things." Flint, drunk on happiness and whiskey, didn't seem to notice. He was just thrilled to have his brother back. But Tabitha saw. She saw the way Nate's gaze lingered on the silver candlesticks on the table, the way he assessed the quality of the furniture. He wasn't looking at a home. He was taking inventory. A few days later, Tabitha was in the barn, grooming Goldie. The Palomino, once so wild, was now gentle and affectionate with her. Nate walked in, startling both of them. "Quite a horse," he said, running a hand along Goldie's flank. "Flint said he found her in the wild. Funny, I saw a horse just like this on a poster in town. A big reward for her return. Belonged to some rich fella over in the next county." Tabitha's blood ran cold. Another lie. Even the horse was part of a deception. "You should be careful, Miss Zimmer," Nate continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "My brother, he's not the man he seems. He gets an idea in his head and he doesn't let go. It's dangerous." Was it a warning or a threat? That night, unable to sleep, she crept to the locked office, the one Flint kept his private papers in. The knife her father had given her was small, but the tip was sharp. She worked it into the gap between the door and the frame, jimmying the old lock. It clicked open with a soft snick. The office was coated in a thick layer of dust, untouched for years, except for the desk. The surface was clean, and on it sat a ledger. She opened it. It wasn't a record of cattle sales. It was a detailed account of Harold Jenkins' movements for the last 5 years. Cities, dates, aliases, names of his victims. It was the work of a man consumed by obsession. But there was another folder underneath. This one was different. It contained legal documents, deeds, land surveys, and letters. Letters between her fiancé, Harold Jenkins, and a name that made her heart stop. Nate Yancey. They weren't strangers. They were partners. The plan was all there, laid out in black and white. Jenkins would swindle women, gathering capital. Nate, with his knowledge of the area, would identify struggling ranches they could buy out for pennies on the dollar, using Jenkins' ill-gotten gains. Their ultimate prize? The Yancey Ranch itself. Flint was known to be stubborn, unwilling to sell, so they had devised a crueler plan. Jenkins was supposed to meet Tabitha, but not to abandon her. He was supposed to marry her. He would become part of the family, a viper in the nest. He would use her to get close to Flint, to learn the ranch's weaknesses, and then, with Nate's help, they would ruin him from the inside out and take everything. Flint's interference had ruined their plan. Jenkins had panicked when he saw Flint's man watching the dock and had fled, leaving Tabitha stranded. Nate's dramatic return wasn't a homecoming. It was Plan B. He had come to finish the job his partner had failed to start. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Tabitha's head snapped up. A shadow fell across the doorway. It wasn't Flint. It was Nate, and in his hand he held a pistol. "I told you my brother gets ideas in his head," Nate said, his charming smile now a twisted, ugly thing. "Looks like you do too. Pity." His eyes were cold, devoid of the warmth they mimicked so well. He took a step into the room, raising the gun. Tabitha backed away, her hand knocking a heavy inkwell off the desk. It shattered on the floor, splattering dark ink across the wood. "What's going on in there?" Flint's voice boomed from down the hall. Nate's eyes widened in panic. He lunged for her, grabbing her arm. "Not a word!" he hissed, pressing the cold barrel of the pistol to her temple. "We're just having a late-night chat." Flint appeared in the doorway, his face a thundercloud of confusion and suspicion. "Nate, what the hell are you doing?" "Just getting acquainted with your new housekeeper, brother," Nate said, his voice slick as oil. "She was showing me some of Pa's old papers. Seems you've been keeping secrets." Flint's eyes flickered from Nate's face, to the gun at Tabitha's head, to the open ledger on the desk. Understanding, cold and horrible, dawned on his face. The joy he'd felt at his brother's return curdled into bitter betrayal. "You," Flint whispered, the word filled with a pain deeper than any physical blow. "It was you all along." "He was weak, Flint," Nate spat, his charming facade crumbling to reveal the bitter, resentful man beneath. "Pa left you everything. The ranch. The name. What did I get? A horse and a handshake. Jenkins and I were just leveling the playing field." From the yard, a man's voice called out, a voice that turned Tabitha's blood to ice. "Nate, everything all right in there?" Harold Jenkins stepped into the doorway behind Flint. He was holding a rifle, and behind him stood two hired men, their faces hard and emotionless. They were trapped. "It is now," Nate said with a triumphant smirk. "It seems the party has finally started." The air in the office was thick enough to choke on. Flint stood between the two men who had betrayed him, his face a mask of stone. Harold Jenkins looked at Tabitha, a sneer twisting his handsome features. "Well, well," Jenkins said. "Look what the cat dragged in. I should have known you wouldn't just disappear." You plain girls are always so stubborn. Rage, pure and hot, burned through Tabitha's fear. She was done being a victim. Let her go, Nate, Flint said, his voice dangerously calm. This is between us. Oh, I don't think so, Nate laughed, his grip tightening on Tabitha's arm. She's my insurance policy. You see, the deed to this ranch requires 2 Yanzi signatures to sell. Pa made sure of that. So you're going to sign it over to me, brother. Or the next thing Miss Zimmer hears will be a very loud bang. Jenkins and his men leveled their rifles at Flint. Theo and the other hands were in the bunkhouse, too far away to hear. They were alone. Flint's eyes met Tabitha's. In them, she didn't see defeat. She saw a question, an apology, and a flicker of a plan. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod towards the window. The window? It looked out over the back of the house, towards the corrals, towards Goldie. Tabitha knew what she had to do. "You're a fool if you think you'll get away with this," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. She looked directly at Jenkins. "And you're not just a snake, you're an idiot. Did you really think she jerked her head towards Nate, was going to split this with you fairly? He's been playing you from the start." Nate's eyes flickered with anger. Jenkins frowned. A seed of doubt. It was all she needed. In one fluid motion, Tabitha stomped down hard on Nate's instep with her heel. He howled in pain, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. It was enough. She twisted, slamming her elbow into his ribs, and broke free. "Now, Flint!" she screamed. Flint didn't hesitate. He dove, not at Nate, but sideways, crashing through the window in an explosion of glass and splintered wood. Jenkins and his men, startled, fired their rifles, the shots tearing through the space where Flint had been. Nate scrambled for Tabitha, but she was already moving, kicking over the heavy desk, sending papers and ink flying. It crashed to the floor between them, a makeshift barrier. "Get him!" Jenkins yelled to his men, who rushed out the front door to circle the house. Nate raised his pistol, his face contorted with rage. "You meddling little—" But before he could fire, a shadow filled the doorway. It was Theo, the old foreman, holding a massive shotgun. He must have been woken by the gunshots. "Drop it, Nate," Theo said, his voice a low growl. "This is not how your father would have wanted it." "Stay out of this, old man," Nate snarled, but his eyes darted nervously between Theo and the open door. Outside, the night erupted in chaos. Shouts, the thunder of hooves, and a high-pitched, piercing whistle. Tabitha knew that sound. It was the whistle Flint used to call Goldie. She ran to the broken window. In the moonlight, she saw an incredible sight. Flint was on Goldie's back, riding bareback. The Palomino, the horse everyone thought was wild, moved with the speed and precision of a warhorse. They weren't just running. They were herding. The rest of the ranch horses, spooked by the noise, were stampeding out of the open corral, directly towards Jenkins' 2 hired guns. The men, caught in the open, yelled in panic as a wave of horseflesh bore down on them. They were scattered, their rifles lost in the confusion. Jenkins, seeing his plan unraveling, ran back into the house, his face pale with fury. "It's over, Nate. Let's go." Nate looked at Theo's shotgun, then at the chaos outside. He was trapped. With a final curse, he threw his pistol down and made a run for the back door. But as he burst outside, a rope snaked through the air, settling perfectly around his shoulders. He was jerked off his feet, landing hard in the dirt. Flint sat on Goldie, the end of the rope coiled in his hand, his face grim and sad in the moonlight. Jenkins didn't get far. As he tried to flee into the darkness, the other ranch hands, now armed and awake, surrounded him. It was over. By the time the sun rose, the local sheriff had taken Jenkins and Nate away in chains. The 2 hired guns had fled into the prairie. The ranch was quiet again, the silence heavy with the ghosts of the night's events. Tabitha stood on the porch, watching the sunrise paint the sky. She felt exhausted, but for the first time she felt safe. She had faced down the men who sought to destroy her, and had not only survived, but fought back. Flint came to stand beside her. The cuts on his face from the broken window were the only outward signs of the battle. The deeper wounds were hidden from view. "The horse," she said quietly. "Goldie, she wasn't wild, was she?" He shook his head. "I bought her from a traveling performer a year ago. She's trained. I was training her for this. For him." Another secret, another calculated part of his plan. He turned to face her, and the shame in his eyes was absolute. "Tabitha, everything I told you in that shack was the truth. I started down this path for revenge, but I ended up finding you. I know I don't deserve you. I know I have no right to ask, but I am asking." He took her hands in his. They were trembling. "Stay, not as my housekeeper, as my partner, as my wife. Let me spend the rest of my life making up for the lies. Let me build an honest world with you, right here." She looked into his eyes, the same blue as the brother who had betrayed him, but filled with a fierce, unwavering loyalty. He was a complicated, broken man. He had used her, deceived her, but he had also protected her, respected her, and in the end had trusted her to be his partner when it mattered most. He had offered her a job when she was destitute. He had taught her to be strong. He had shown her a home. Her old life, the one she had planned, was a fantasy built on the letters of a liar. This life, this was real. It was hard and dangerous and messy, but it was true. "All right, Flint Yancey," she said, a small smile touching her lips. "You can stop trying to win my heart. You already have." His shoulders sagged with relief, and he pulled her into his arms, his embrace fierce and desperate. He was no longer a stranger, no longer her employer. He was the man she would build her future with, under the vast, open skies of Missouri. They were married a month later, with Theo as the best man and the whole town in attendance. The Yancey Ranch, once a place of secrets and sorrow, became a home filled with laughter. Tabitha never did become a teacher in the town's new schoolhouse. She found she had enough to teach right here on the ranch, not just the children they would eventually have, but the broken man who had become her husband, teaching him how to let go of the ghosts of the past and embrace the future. She had come west seeking a safe harbor and had instead found a wild, beautiful, and unpredictable sea. And she wouldn't have had it any other way. Sometimes the life you get is so much better than the one you thought you wanted. If you enjoyed this story of justice and second chances, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales from the edge of the map.